Good morning, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This will be a very short session because there is no electricity here and my laptop has very little backup. So, till the backup is there, uh, the session will continue, then it will abruptly end in between. So, kindly bear with that. So, just confirm, am I audible to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So what we are going to start is the topic that is basic prohibitions. In the first unit, we are now familiar with the basic principle of Islamic finance. That is the principle of general permissibility. Al-aslu fil ashiya'i al-ibaha. The default status of all things is permissibility. So then the question arises, if the default status is permissibility, then there must be some list of prohibitions. So we are going to study about those things uh, which are prohibited. So the only thing that we have to check then is to see if those prohibited elements are present in a particular contract and transaction or not. If the element of those prohibited things are there in a particular contract or transaction, then from Sharia point of view, it will be declared as not permissible, not allowed, not permissible and prohibited. So this is how, the things are very simple because the most important rule and principle that we have to remember is the rule of general permissibility, that all things are allowed, all human aspects, that how they deal with each other, how they interact with each other, are allowed by default until and unless some clear prohibitions in sources of Sharia are there. And sources of Sharia, we know that Quran and Hadith, primarily Quran and Hadith, and there are some secondary sources also, but those secondary sources are also based on Quran and Hadith. So, so we have to just look if there are these elements which are prohibited in a particular transaction or not. If those elements are there, then those are clearly not Sharia compliant, and we can say that these transactions, these contracts are not Sharia compliant or Islamic. Are not as per the Islamic guidance and Islamic prescriptions. Sharia compliance is the raison d'etre of the Islamic financial system. Concern for the Sharia teammates should dominate all other concerns of Islamic financial institutions. Why this separate branch of finance has evolved since 1970s? Because the basic logic, the basic rationale, why Islamic finance exists. Because it exists because Sharia compliance is the most important thing for a Muslim. He cannot conduct any financial transaction which are contrary to the Islamic guidance and which are contrary to the Islamic injunctions, which are contrary to the teachings of Quran and Hadith. So compliance of what? To follow what we have been ordered and to avoid what has been declared as prohibited. So Sharia compliance is the reason creator of the Islamic financial system. Concern for the Sharia tenets should dominate all other concerns of Islamic financial institution. It is only through the compliance of Islamic banking operations with the norms and principles of Sharia that the system can develop on a sustainable basis and can ensure fairness for investors, uh, the business community, and institutions. So, so one of the theme, so it is only through compliance that we will achieve a system that is fair, that is sustainable. Fair, this word will come very multiple times during this course because we believe that only a system that promotes justice, that promotes fairness, that promotes equality, uh, and that system is more desirable instead of a system that promotes inequality, that promotes injustice, that promotes uh, disquiet in the society, etc. So the prohibitions that we shall discuss here include the riba, uh, commonly known as interest. Uh, in conventional commercial terminology, we call it interest. In Hindi, we call it biyaz. Uh, but this is not exact translation of riba because the concept of riba, the Quranic concept of riba, and as it has been elaborated in Hadith, is very broad. And say, for example, riba can be translated as interest, and can also be translated as usury. Usury, and this is what Christians did. They translated the riba in their books, in the Bible and in the Torah, and they translated it as usury. And usury in nowadays, usury means high rate of interest, high rate of interest, and interest means normal interest. Normal interest, for example, 7-8%, whatever is there right now. The rate of interest on bonds and fixed income securities. So that interest they consider it as a normal interest, and if there is some excess interest beyond the normal interest, they call it usury. And in West, they have regulations and laws against usury. So if there is any financial institution uh, that is operating in the West, it has to follow that law, that is the usury law. They cannot charge an interest which is more than the ceiling that has been mentioned in the usury laws. So, but roughly we can translate riba as interest, but we can also translate it as usury. So in conventional commercial terminology, normally the interest term has become very commonly used term. So it is sufficient if we are using the word interest. So this is the basic prohibition, and the prohibition is very strict, so much strict that in Quran Allah says that if somebody takes or indulges in riba, Allah declares war with him, with a person who indulges in riba. And it's not that only taking of riba is prohibited, but also giving of riba is prohibited. Taking and giving, just like bribe taking is prohibited, bribe giving is prohibited. Similarly, riba taking and riba giving both are prohibited. So and the second and third thing that we will discuss is masir and qimar. Masir, qimar, and gharar. Masir and qimar are related terms, related terminology, and roughly we can translate Masir and Qimar as gambling. And speculation also comes under this category, that is Masir and Qimar. So gambling and and you know speculation. Masir and Qimar can roughly be translated as gambling and speculation. Then the third thing that we will discuss, gharar. Gharar means, gharar is the concept of gharar is also very broad, but roughly it can be translated as excessive uncertainty. So if there is any transaction in which there is excess uncertainty, that will lead to conflict between parties, and it will not be allowed from Islamic point of view, from Sharia point of view, because of the presence of gharar. Say, for example, in classical books, the example of gharar has been given like this: I cannot sell you fish in a pond uh, without capturing them. So unless and until I capture those, those fishes through a net, uh, I cannot sell them, because if I will sell them, the buyer will not know in advance how many fishes are there, what is the quality of that fish, So the quantity of the fish is unknown. So one aspect that is very important in a financial transaction, that is the quantity of the goods that is being traded or sold or bought. So if the quantity itself is unknown, so that kind of transaction that brings a lot of uncertainty in the transaction, and most probably it will lead to conflict between the buyer and seller. So that kind of transaction is not allowed. Similarly, say for example, if some bird is flying in the sky, I cannot sell you that. If I say that I'm selling you this bird that is flying in the sky, how can I sell a bird that is not under my control? I cannot deliver that bird to you. So since delivery is not possible until unless I own that, and unless I'm able to deliver that product, how can I sell something which I cannot deliver to you? So this kind of transaction actually is introducing a lot of uncertainty. Another term that we can remember in mind, contractual uncertainty. So if there is small uncertainty can be there, that is allowed and that is unavoidable, because business itself is a risky thing. Nobody can guarantee that in business that guarantee is not there in business. There will always be risk, but sometimes there are avoidable risks, very obvious risks. So so bearing those excessive risks is not allowed. Just I have given you two examples. One is selling of fish, which is in the pond, and selling of bird, which is flying in the sky. That is not allowed. And this concept is known as gharar. So gharar can be, translated as roughly can be translated as contractual uncertainty, contractual uncertainty, or excessive contractual uncertainty. So these are three basic prohibitions: riba, masir, and kemar, which are, masir and kemar both are, same things, related things. Then the third thing is gharar. Riba, masir, and gharar. These are three basic prohibitions that we will discuss in detail in the next class. And gharar, or excessive uncertainty about the subject matter, and or the price in exchange and the norms. So if I say that I'm selling you this product and I am not specifying the price, so the contract will not be there, and it will not be considered as a valid contract from Sharia point of view also, because price is unknown. How can I sell something which the buyer and seller have to agree on a price, and if price itself is missing from the contract, so that contract cannot be a valid contract. So price should be known, subject should be known. So these are just examples of gharar. So, or the price in exchanges and the norms and the ethics of the business and finance in the Islamic framework. Apart from these three prohibitions, that is riba, masir, and gharar, there are some, the business ethics, the concept of ethics or morality is also there. And even if something is allowed from Sharia point of view, it may be contrary to the ethics and morality of the Sharia. Although we can say that this transaction is, gharar free, this transaction is free from qimar and masir, this transaction is free from riba also. But simply, if a transaction is Sharia compliant, it does not mean it is also according to the norms and ethics and morality of the Islamic Sharia, or the Islamic framework. So the ethics, the concept of ethics and morality is very broad. And if you remember, we have discussed the concept of maqasid al-Sharia. So if you keep those maqasid in your mind, that is justice, that is truth, that is fairness, that is equality, that is right to all the basic things, right to safety. All those things that are there in maqasid al Sharia. And then if we keep those maqasid also apart from these three things, that is riba, masir, and qamar, riba, masir, qimar, and gharar, if we keep those maqasid and al-sharia in mind, then the transaction can be said that it is Sharia based transaction, because not only it takes care of the basic prohibitions, but it also keeps in mind the ethics and morality of the Sharia. So these are, two things. Uh, the one thing is basic prohibition, that is riba, gharar, and masir. Another thing is taking care of the ethics and morality that has been delineated and explained in the Quran and Hadith. So even if someone is not complying to the ethics part, so but only taking care of riba, gharar, basir, and qimar, so we can call that transaction as Sharia compliant transaction, Sharia compliant deal, Sharia compliant product. But we cannot, if a product is Sharia compliant, it does not necessarily means that it is Sharia inspired. It does not necessarily mean it is Sharia based, because Sharia based product is different concept and Sharia compliant product is different concept. Is this clear to you? Okay, thank you. Sharia has identified some elements which are to be avoided in commerce or business transactions. In this regard, the prohibition of riba, gharar, and gambling is the most strategic factor that defines invalid and voidable contracts and demarcates the overall limits which should not be crossed. So this is actually the limits. We should not cross the limits. And but there are other things also, but these are the limits. Riba, gharar, and gambling is the most strategic factor that defines uh, invalid and voidable contracts and demarcates the overall limits which should not be crossed. We will elaborate upon these one by one. Riba. The literal meaning of riba is excess. Literal meaning of riba is excess. This is the Arabic word, riba. Riba means excess or increase or gain or growth. Excess, increase, gain, or growth. This is the literal meaning of riba. And in Quran and Hadith, it refers to two main types of transaction. Broadly, riba, the Quranic concept of riba, and is there are two types of riba: riba al-nasiya and riba al-fazl. Riba al-nasiya is results from the deferment, growth through deferment. That is the definition of interest. That if I will give you 100 rupee today, then you are supposed to give me 110 rupee after 1 year. So, the growth of 10 rupee is because of deferment. So that is riba al nasiya. Another form of riba that is also prohibited, but that is not very relevant in today's context. That is riba al fazl. So normally people confuse between these two things, and in a matter of riba al nasiya, that is interest, they bring the concept of riba al fazl. So riba al fazl is different. Riba al fazl results in a transaction uh, of buying and selling transaction. Uh, an interest based lending and borrowing. The riba al nasiya is related with lending and borrowing, whereas riba al fazl is related with a sales transaction. So if I am selling you gold, uh, so I cannot exchange gold, uh, I mean, with two different quantities. So if I give you, 24 karat gold of 10 gram, so you have to give me, same 24 karat gold of 10 gram. There cannot be difference in the quantity and quality, and and it should be exchange on the spot. So, this is riba al fazl. So there is a hadith that says gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates, and salt for salt, like for like, hand to hand. So these things have to be exchanged on the spot. Hand to hand means on the spot and in similar quantity. in equal amounts, and any increase is riba. Any increase is riba. The surplus fazl. Fazl means fazl. The literal meaning of fazl is also increase. So the surplus fazl here implies the disparity in the amounts of two objects traded. But in today's context, the important concept that we have to remember is not the concept of riba al fazl. It is the concept of riba al nasiya that is more prevalent and relevant in today's context. And riba al nasiya comes into play in borrowing and lending transactions. So in pre-Islamic era, the riba of deferment was the charging of a fee or an interest-free loan once it came due. The fee on a the deferment often led to doubling. जैसे कहते थे कि आज मैं तुम्हें दे रहा हूँ, तुम 2 महीने बाद you have to return me back. So after 2 months, the person will come there and say that I'm not able to return you the principal amount that I have taken from you. So the person who has lent the money will say, now you have to return me double of the amount. So I have given you $100. Now you have to return me $200. So the deferment often led to doubling of the principal in a year. So this was the exorbitant rate of interest, doubling, just doubling in a year. So if I'm giving you 100 rupee, I will take 200 from you after 1 year. So if you delay, if you are not able to pay me on the time, then I will double the principal amount. So this was the practice in the pre-Islamic era. So when the Prophet, peace be upon him, came, so these were the practices. I mean, money lenders were there, and they were indulging in these kinds of activities. And Jews were very, were the leaders in money lending business in Medina, and in some other localities also. That is, Aus and Khazraj were the two tribes that were there. Khaybar was their main, the locality where Jews were there. In Medina also Jews were there, and money lending was their business. Just like in India, Baniyas are known for money lending. And let me share you very interesting thing. I just read some article which explained that one of the reason why Britishers were successful to become the rulers of India without much resistance. Some resistance came from very selected pockets, like say for example Tipu Sultan, or the fight that happened in Plassey, the Battle of Plassey that happened with Nawab Sirajuddaulah, and there are some other battles also. So, but I mean, the loss of Britishers were very less, and one of the reason was that the money lenders that were operating that in that time, the center of that those money lenders was Kolkata. They supported the British India Company, and they engaged in money business, money lending business with the Britishers. And just before the fight, they were already in agreement with the Britishers. They were ready to hand over uh, the whatever rule to the Britishers, because their business interests were aligned with the Britishers. Their business interests were uh, in line. I mean, so when they were Britishers were going, so they were. Most of the money lenders were afraid that their business will be affected. Now they will not borrow from them. The Britishers will not borrow from them. So I mean, just this it is just an incident that I wanted to share with you. So riba al nasiya. So riba al nasiya is the thing that you have to remember is the concept of riba al nasiya comes in borrowing and lending transaction. So in borrowing and lending transaction, the question of riba comes. The deferment often led to doubling of the principal in a year and then redoubling when the period expired, and another deferment became due. This radical compounding is mentioned in verse 3.3, verse number 130. So in this verse, actually, the word azafa, muzafa has been mentioned, doubling and redoubling. So some people who try to justify the present day interest, they use this verse, that is 133, and the azafa muzafa is mentioned there, that doubling and they say that doubling and redoubling, that is excess interest is not allowed, but normal interest is allowed. But in there are other verses that without providing any condition, um, uh, that prohibits interest. All kinds of interest are not allowed, whether it is normal interest or excessive or an exorbitant interest. So that one of the rationale that some people use to allow the normal today's riba. So that justification is not allowed, because riba of any kind, whether it is excess or normal, is not allowed. So riba al nasiya is not allowed, riba al fazl is not allowed. And okay, we will continue in the next class. uh, Thank you for joining this class, and we will continue talking about okay, Muhammad Bilal has written Jagat Seth was the main money lender who switched to British side. Yes, Jagat Singh is very well known money lender who sided with the British. These are facts, historical facts. We should be aware of.
Sir, please explain riba al-fadl.
Riba al Fazl comes in. The question of Riba Fazl is relevant in sales transaction. So, if I am giving you gold, and in return you are also giving me gold, so there are two conditions. This transaction should be on the spot, and the same quantity and quality should be exchanged on the spot. So if I will give you some gold today, you cannot return me gold in future, the same gold, because this has been prohibited. So same thing cannot be, commodities cannot be exchanged. And this rule, I mean, applies to all commodities, because if you focus on the things that has been mentioned in this hadith: gold, silver, wheat, barley, dates, and salt, all these things are commodities. So commodities should be exchanged for money. Commodities should not be exchanged for same commodity. So gold should not be exchanged for gold, silver should not be exchanged for silver, and if they are being exchanged, then it should be on the spot, and similar quantity and equal amounts. But as I have mentioned that this thing, I mean, riba al fazl is a separate concept, and riba al nasiya is a separate concept. The basic thing that differentiates the riba al nasiya from riba al fazl is that riba al nasiya comes into play in a borrowing and lending transaction, and riba al fazl comes in a trade, in a sales transaction. So this is the basic difference. So commodities cannot be exchanged for similar commodities. This is the ruling, and if they are being exchanged, then it has to be on the spot in similar quantity. Okay, thank you very much. We will continue talking about this riba, and I will
Thank you.
encourage you to study, on your own also the concept of riba, and prepare your questions in your mind. Because if you will question me, then further
Sir,
clarity will
I
develop.
have a question related to riba.
Yes, yes.
So, as riba is prohibited and we will not accept riba, then what happen in present day situation is poor purchasing power of money will decrease over period of time because of time value of money. So, how can we tackle this problem of not accepting riba?
The point that you have discussed is also one of the point that has been given as a justification for making riba halal. But this point is also not valid. Listen me very carefully, because a money which is in the hands of lender, or whether it is in the hands of borrower, that money is losing its value. So the borrowing and lending transaction is not responsible for this. So whether you lend that money to someone or you do not lend, that money is losing its value. So you cannot attribute that losing of value to that transaction, and you cannot transfer that burden to the borrower only. Why you want to transfer the burden of time value of money to the borrower? Why you are not ready to share the burden with the borrower? So the borrowing and lending transaction is different. So whether we indulge in lending or not, the money is bound to lose its value. If we keep that money in bank, then again, then the value will decrease because of time value of because of inflation. So, but some people say there are some opinions that say that we can charge something which is equal to time value of money. We will continue on this point also in the next class.
Sir, but if
Okay,
we are loaning gold and we have to return the same amount of gold, but the thing is the intrinsic value of gold remains the same or increasing both time. But the currency does not have any intrinsic value, and it's like you said, its value will decrease in future. So by that parameter, it should be actually be justified. It's
See,
like some
if on the spot I am giving you 10 gram of gold and I am taking 12 gram of gold from you, so that excess is actually riba. And why someone will be interested in giving 12 gram of gold in exchange for 10 gram of gold? So that is injustice, and that is unfair for the
yes, sir,
parties.
that is true. But in
Yeah.
case of currency, if we are taking loan as from like currency, and if we have to return it after few years, so it should be matched to the value. By that sense logic, we can say that some amount of interest is justified.
That is why Nidan,
Yes,
uh,
sir.
Nidal is speaking. Okay, Nidal, what I am saying, you are lending money, but what if you decide not to lend? Th- Then are you protected from the devaluation in the currency?
No, sir. If
So,
if I do not invest it, then no.
so basically, if a bank or money lender or whoever is that financial institution is there, if financial institution is not lending money to anyone and just keeping money in the vault in the bank balance, then because of inflation, the money is losing its value. So, so that concept, I mean, the losing of value of the currency is not related with the borrowing and lending transaction. And but in conventional, conventional borrowing and lending, there are two concepts: fixed rate of interest and floating rate. So, floating rate of interest is actually related with the inflation and with the interest rate that is announced by the RBI. So if that interest rate changes, then the interest rate the borrower is charging from the lender is charging from the borrower also changes. So home loans, bike loans, car loans are available in both formats, fixed interest rate as well as floating rate of interest. And the thing that you are mentioning, Nidal, is actually the concept of floating rate of interest. So floating rate of interest, if a borrower is opting for that, so sometimes that concept may go against him and in favor of the lender. Sometimes it may favor the lender and it may go against the borrower. So both things are possible. Uh, okay, keep thinking on that. I'm also thinking. I'm also a learner of this topic. I do not claim to know everything. I'm just a learner, and the book that I have shared with you, study these topics from that book also. I will also share another book with you, uh, and that two books will be sufficient for this course. Okay, thank you very